Hello, friends. Welcome to Winter at St. Andrew. It is my privilege to welcome you here today from the beautiful St. Andrew Sanctuary. I am grateful, as always, to share this sacred online space with you, where we are all invited, included, and valued as vital and beloved members of our broader worshiping community. With its long nights and quiet days, winter invites us into new rhythms and routines that make possible the rest, renewal, and rootedness our bodies and souls long for. What appears to be a season of dormancy is a time of stillness and hidden growth, essential to all of life. At St. Andrew, we offer an abundance of opportunities throughout this season for self-care, spiritual growth, finding community, and serving others. You can visit gostandrew.com/winter for more information. We are proud to be an open, affirming, inclusive congregation that welcomes all people into the full life and communion of our church. This includes saints and sinners, believers and skeptics, the lost and the found, the wanderers and the wanderers, families of all shapes and sizes, and people from every point along life's journey. No matter who you are or where you've been, no matter what you believe or even if you believe anything at all, you are welcome at St. Andrew and you belong here. If you have any questions about our church, prayer requests for our care team, or if you would like to get in touch with a member of our pastoral team or staff, please email info@gostandrew.com. If you would like to explore deeper engagement with the St. Andrew community through our many classes, group life gatherings, and service opportunities, you can email us directly at connect@gostandrew.com. We'd love to hear from you. Just as a reminder, our full Sunday morning worship services, complete with music, prayer, announcements, liturgy, ministry spotlights, and the sermon, are live streamed on our YouTube page each week and permanently archived for viewing anytime. Lastly, to contribute a financial gift to the work and ministry of St. Andrew, you can always visit gostandrew.com/give or text St. Andrew to 28950. And now let's listen together to this week's scripture and sermon.
A reading from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 50, verses 33 and 34. The Lord of heavenly forces proclaims, "The people of Israel were oppressed, together with the people of Judah. Their captors held them and refused to let them go. Yet their Redeemer is strong. The Lord of heavenly forces is his name. He will surely defend their cause and give them rest in the land. But he will unsettle the people of Babylon."
There's always more to the story. This should be our daily mantra. There is always more to the story. Rarely do we have all the facts. Seldom do we know what will happen next. There is always more to the story. The old man sitting quietly on a park bench feeding the pigeons, what's his story? The war veteran standing at his post in the center median, holding that paper cup in one hand and a cardboard sign in the other, what's his story? Where is it leading? The middle-aged woman smoking a cigarette while pacing nervously outside the doors of the ER at midnight. The 20-something clutching his cup of coffee, sitting uneasily in a circle of strangers at his first AA meeting. The first-time mother rocking her infant back to sleep at 2 a.m. as she herself stares down the tunnel of postpartum depression. Or the high school senior running through his list of colleges one more time, even though he hasn't the foggiest idea what he wants to do with his life. They are all finding themselves in a particular moment of time called the present. This moment that's bookended by a past they can't possibly go back to and a future they can't possibly predict. They find themselves, like we all do at times, in that moment between how did I get here and where am I going? Between what just happened and how's this going to end? Some people call that experience liminality or liminal space. Liminal from the Latin limen. It means threshold, a point of entering or beginning, like a doorway. A liminal space is a moment between what was and what is to come. A place of transition and waiting and uncertainty. It's the space where new realities and new identities and new possibilities are birthed, but none of us really wants to go through liminal spaces because sometimes they can feel like a dark night of the soul, and they can often last so long that we're prone to give up before we can even get through them. Years ago, you too wrote a song about that experience, describing it as something like being stuck in a moment you can't get out of. That song was written to the late frontman of INXS, Michael Hutchence, who took his life at the age of 37. And in that song, Bono imagines what it might be like if Hutchence was still alive. He imagines himself trying to persuade his friend to hold on a little longer, even in this present darkness. And if the night runs over, and if the day won't last, and if your ways should falter along this stony path, it's just a moment. This time will pass. That's a hard truth for us to accept, that there's always more to the story, if only we can stay in the story long enough. This truth is reflected in the subtle but extraordinary power of this week's conjunction, yet. When we think about who God is, how God works in our lives, how our futures are always open and replete with possibility, we turn to this hopeful, promising little word, yet, an indispensable conjunction in the grammar of our faith. It appears hundreds of times in the Bible, but unlike and, for, and while, which we've already explored, yet is a conjunction we don't often use in the modern world. We're most apt to use yet as an adverb, as in, I can't believe it's already February and I haven't gone skiing yet. But it's less common to use yet as a conjunction, thanks to the popularity of its close cousin, but, which we assume means the same thing as yet. We sometimes use yet and but interchangeably, as in, I grew up skiing, but now I prefer snowboarding. Or, I love skiing, yet I'm not a fan of moguls. Most assume there's no real difference between but and yet, but according to grammar nerds, there's actually a subtle difference between the two, and knowing this difference can change everything in certain contexts. But, we are told, introduces a contrast between two ideas or things, and then simply treats that contrast as a fact, with little or no emotional component. Yet, on the other hand, introduces a contrast while also expressing a feeling of expectation, possibility, surprise, or mystery. For example, you match up with someone on a dating app. I've been married 34 years, so I personally don't know how this works, but maybe you meet up with someone, you have a nice dinner, you get to know one another, and at the end of the date, he or she says to you, I like you, but we don't have much in common. Unless you're not super great at picking up on social cues, you'd probably figure right then that there's no chance this relationship is going anywhere, right? But if that date says, I like you, yet we don't have much in common, you might reasonably assume there that the door is still cracked, even just a little. That yet suggests maybe you've got a chance. It could be that you're super desperate, who knows, but doesn't it sound like maybe with a little work, you've still got a shot? That maybe there's more to this story still? It's subtle, but it's real. In fact, you can even feel it physically. Say the word but, and you can actually feel your shoulders slump ever so slightly. But say the word yet, and you can't help but feel your eyebrows rise in expectation or suspense. Try it. You'll see what I mean. We say, the world can be so violent and cruel, yet I will choose peace and kindness. Or, I have no idea where this work project is going, yet I'll soldier on. Or, she broke my heart after the second date because we really didn't have anything in common, yet I will dare to love again. There's something about yet that suggests maybe there's more to the story. So yet is a word of faith and courage and hope, especially in liminal spaces when we don't have all the facts and we're unsure if everything or even anything is going to work out. Throughout Hebrew and Christian scripture, yet is used to connect something hopeless with something hopeful, something painful or frightening with something comforting or promising. It often brings together in one thought or sentence both our darkest realities and God's divine possibilities in a given situation. Perhaps this is best illustrated in our reading from Jeremiah 50, written at one of Israel's darkest moments. The Jews are stuck in a moment, if you will, a long moment called exile. They've been detained by their Babylonian captors for nearly 70 years. A whole generation has already died in captivity. Most of the surviving elders have given up hope of ever going home, and those born in captivity have no concept of what home even looks like. Just when life in Babylon can't get any bleaker, the prophet Jeremiah writes them an oracle announcing that the time has finally come for them to go home. He says, the people of Israel were pressed together with the people of Judah. Their captors held them and refused to let them go. Yet their Redeemer is strong. The Lord of heavenly forces is his name. He says he will surely defend their cause and give them rest in the land. Just when all hope seems lost, Jeremiah speaks a divine yet into that liminal space of their collective experience, and suddenly their eyebrows rise in expectation and suspense. What Jeremiah was saying was that it's just a moment. This time will pass. Things look bleak, but your redemption is near, because with God there's always more to the story. It all hinges on that simple but indispensable yet. There's another story in the Gospel of Luke about a time when Jesus finds himself in a liminal space. Jesus goes to a garden called Gethsemane. He takes some of his best friends with him, but they can't stay awake. It's just hours before Jesus would be arrested and later crucified, and he already seems to know what's about to happen to him. Jesus, in that moment, is overcome with fear and grief. The dark reality of his predicament overwhelms him, and so he prays, Abba, if you're willing, take this cup of suffering from me. Yet, not my will, but yours be done. What makes that prayer such a profoundly moving one is that simple but all-determining yet. Jesus knows. Jesus knows what's going to happen next. Crucifixion awaits him, but he wills himself to trust that death on a cross is not the end. That there's more to this story, to his story, than what any human eye can see or any human mind can comprehend. Yet not my will, but yours be done. It's only possible to utter a prayer like that if you really do believe there's more to this story. Which is why yet is one of the most hopeful words in the Christian lexicon. It speaks to a belief in divine possibility in a world that is ruled by reasoned probability. Have you ever noticed how so much of modern life is governed by odds and probability? Life insurance, car insurance, health insurance, Powerball, Vegas, weather forecasting, horse racing, medical diagnoses, even that dating app you use to find the person with whom you surprisingly had nothing in common. There's probability attached to all of that. We ask ourselves, what are the odds of survival? The odds of winning, the odds of getting sick, the odds of getting in an accident or getting struck by lightning or getting divorced or finding a match or finding a job or finding a soulmate. Every day in the modern world we are told that we're just playing the odds and that our attempts to beat the odds are futile and that if we do happen to beat the odds, we're just one of the lucky ones because the system is rigged against us. It's a rather dark view of the world, but it fosters this competition and scarcity thinking. It robs us of wonder and gratitude and hopefulness. Whenever probability rules our lives, we live in fear and we lose our capacity for surprise and awe. We simply wait for that proverbial shoe to drop. We assume that based on the facts, this is likely how our situation is going to play out. And there's nothing more to this story. So this is all we can expect. But God is not an odds maker, and our futures are wide open. Every liminal space is bursting with divine possibility. There is always more to the story. Just after I moved to St. Andrew from San Diego back in 2014, I found myself in a finance meeting. We were discussing the need for reserve funds in the event of some major catastrophe. And that's when I asked, how much in reserve would we need if, by chance, maybe a tornado happened to hit St. Andrew? And somebody across the table laughed and said, Pastor, rest assured, we don't have tornadoes here. Yeah, there's always more to the story. If you were just playing the odds with those Jews in exile, you'd probably say they'd never get out of Babylon alive. Their captors had a really good thing going, keeping them there. They'd never sign off on a plan to free the Jews, but then it happened. The Persians invaded Babylon and conquered the Babylonians. And after that, the Persian leader moved in. His name was Cyrus the Great. And when he moved in, he sent those Jews packing. Because in God's calculus, divine possibility transcends human probabilities. And because with God there is always more to the story, we can then consider our own lives and all the liminal spaces we find ourselves in, and all the ways our stories are still unfolding and responding to God's call and purposes, if only we will stay with the story a little longer. In the late 1970s, singer and songwriter Leonard Cohen composed a song that was, by all accounts, a complete flop, despite the fact that it took him 5 years to write it with more than 80 draft verses. In 1984, Cohen finally recorded that song, but his record label, CBS, refused to pick it up. And so Cohen released the song through an independent label. No one bought the song. Over the next several years, Cohen kept tinkering with that song, but it never went anywhere. And one night, Cohen was playing at a club in New York. Another musician by the name of John Cale was in the audience that day. And Cale was the founding member of the Velvet Underground. As Cohen performed his song, Cale was blown away by what he heard. And so Cale later did a cover version of that song for Leonard Cohen as a tribute album called I'm Your Fan. The album was released in 1991, and almost no one bought the album. But a woman by the name of Janine did buy it. She lived in Brooklyn, and she had a musician friend by the name of Jeff Buckley. Buckley would often house sit for Janine, and one day while Buckley is house sitting, he spots the CD of I'm Your Fan on the coffee table, and he plays it. And as he hears John Cale's version of Cohen's song, he decides to do his own version of it. Later, Buckley is performing his version of the song in a little club, and an executive from Columbia Records is in the audience and signs Buckley to a record deal. Buckley records his version of Cohen's song on a 1994 album called Grace. It was Buckley's first and only studio album. And, as you can imagine, nobody bought the album. A huge disappointment. But then something tragic happened. It was now 1997. Buckley was in Memphis when he went swimming in the Mississippi River and vanished. He was never seen again. But suddenly the world took an interest in Buckley's music. And that song, Hallelujah, was thrust into the spotlight. Are you following this? 15 years after Leonard Cohen wrote a song that essentially flopped, Buckley's version, which also flopped, and which was a cover of John Cale's cover that also flopped, is today ranked as one of the 500 greatest songs of all time by Rolling Stone magazine. It's been covered more than 300 times now by Dylan, Bono, Bon Jovi, and countless others. There's always more to the story, which is perhaps why that song says, "Yet even though it all went wrong, I'll stand before the Lord of song with nothing on my tongue but Alleluia." Our takeaways for today: we are always living between what was and what is to come. Every liminal space is bursting with divine possibility. Because our future is wide open, there is always more to the story.